Hi, I'm Susie Morgan, founder and director of training at Precision EMDR Academy. And today I want to throw down a bit and hopefully do so in the most respectful of ways. But I really want to say something that I think is really important about attachment work with EMDR therapy. And in doing so, I will really be challenging some of the thought processes that are out there. But I want to give you my perspective on this and why I feel like it's important to do this, but also why I have profound gratefulness and respect for everyone I have learned from. I am really highly aware that I am standing on the shoulders of greats in sitting here and being able to share this with you. The reality is that I've spent 20 years as an EMDR therapist, and during that 20 years, I have gotten to go to training after training after training from people who have come up with incredibly robust treatment approaches, perspectives, really valuable ideas for how we can treat attachment. And I've been able to take in all of those and then apply those. And so, part of this is that I have that benefit of standing on the shoulders of greats, but then also the perspective of being up there. I've gotten kind of the bird's eye view of the various approaches, as well as that opportunity to take them home, to implement them and say, okay, this really moved the needle, or this actually caused some problems. Or maybe somewhere in the middle, this, is part of the equation, but it's not everything. And so I want to share those insights with you. All of them are part of how we approach things with the Precision EMDR methodology, because I really think it's important to sort of curate and synthesize the best of the approaches that are out there and really strategically, surgically treat our clients. And they deserve that. So first, what I want to do is I want to talk about my conviction that I really think with attachment repair, we really need to be focused on working with the adult self, repairing the attachment system through work with the little self, as opposed to using or relying primarily on external figures or idolized parents or things of that nature. And then secondarily, which will step on some other toes, is this idea that I think our language really matters. And I very specifically rely on the language of adult self with little self, or adult self with younger self, because I think that it makes a big difference. And that using language such as inner child, or even the very, very popular right now IFS parts language, it has some pitfalls. And so I want to talk about those things. And so let's start with this idea that perhaps it is better to work on attachment repair from the adult self to the little self, rather than rely on what has been predominantly taught by Laurel Parnell as attachment-focused therapy, or attachment-focused EMDR, in which we really focus on the use of those external figures and idealized parents. So what I have found is that if we focus only on external figures, what we have is only great scaffolding. What we have is this idea that our client has adaptive information that's developed out that's really important, that says someone in their life or someone they've been exposed to has really been able to provide them with a sense of nurture, or a sense of attunement, or protection, or play, or all of those key aspects that we need in order to develop out secure attachment. And that scaffolding really also involves an amazing amount of modeling for like how those things can be done, how those things can be provided, if that's something our client has really no familiarity with. However, if we just stop there, we really pay no attention to the idea that ultimately, when it comes down to it, our clients need to know that they've got them. They need to walk away saying, I've got me, I can rely on me. And then that can build the foundation of them being willing to trust, or able to trust that others out there have got me too. And what happens, I think, if all we do is focus on those external figures and we neglect that sense of the adult self really being able to provide those things for the little self or the younger self, what ends up happening is we really don't actually repair the attachment system. What ends up happening is the client doesn't necessarily really attune to themselves. The client can still be in a state of rejection of self. The client might not really fully embody that sense that I actually can speak on my own behalf. I deserve for me to speak on my own behalf or to take action on my own behalf. So there's this subtle but really meaningful distinction between the distance of a figure doing those things for the little self versus the adult self doing those things for the little self, and the little self really embodying that experience. So this idea I really built out under the teachings of a number of greats out there. So ones that come to mind are Dini Laliotis, Jim Knight, April Steele, who does imaginal nurturing, some work by Sandra Paulson and Katie O'Shea, and there's probably more. I love the fact that Laurel Parnell really shone a light on the need for attachment-focused EMDR. And that light really needed to be shown. That is one of those things that I think is critical for most of the clients that we see, is this idea that we have eyes to see the attachment system and that we are focused on treating that. However, I think with the terminology of her approach being attachment-focused EMDR, it can cause clinicians to think that that's the only game in town and that's the only approach. And I really just don't think it is comprehensive enough. I use her figures all the time. I think it's incredibly important, but I think the focus on the adult self repairing attachment for the little self makes such a more profound difference in actually really developing out that earned secure attachment for our clients and really shifting that internal kind of sense of security comparatively to that reliance on external figures. I think additionally, I have even more concerns about really focusing on this sense of an idealized imaginal parent. What I found in implementing that was that it brought up an enormous amount of profound grief for our clients. And while I really, really think that grief is, like Dini Laliotis says, actually is at the core of complex developmental trauma work, is that realization that my parents, my caregivers just didn't provide these things that I really, really needed, and it hurt me. I do think having this grief over the distance between this idolized parent and the actual parenting that was provided really is a bit unnecessary, because what we can do instead is actually provide that secure attachment figure through developing that out in the adult self in a way that is so powerful that even as there is grief, there is also this enhancement in this sense of development of security at the same time. And it's real. It's not an imagined figure. The adult self that develops out as a secure attachment figure for the little self, the younger self, it's absolutely real. Like, you always have yourself, and you're not going anywhere. So I think that that it just really avoids some pitfalls by really, really focusing in on how do we develop out that adult self to do these things rather than do the work through someone that is imaginary or idealized, that sort of thing. And certainly we can pull in as necessary the modeling from the figures, the protective figures, the wise figures, the nurturing figures, all of that, in order to provide a model to the adult self if that really feels difficult to access. And the final reason why I think it is so essential to work from the adult self to the little self is probably the most important. And that is this idea that we can actually really transform self-rejection and really target shame in powerful ways when we are working specifically with any resistance that that adult has to providing those attachment needs for that little self. And for this, I like to use Jim Knives' protocol. I think his Loving Knives protocol is probably the most powerful kind of protocol in our arsenal as EMDR therapists for shame and self-rejection. And so if we're just working with externalized figures, we might not even catch that look of disdain or that distancing from that can really happen from the adult to the little self, or the distrust of the little self to the adult, in really being willing to be there for them, to see them in a loving way, and to embrace them rather than reject them in the way that's been modeled by their caregivers oftentimes. So let's switch gears to languaging, because I'm very, very careful about using this language. And you'll often hear in my sessions, in my clinical videos, I am asking the client to, look at little you, look at younger you. And so they talk about little me or younger me, that sort of thing. And why I think this is so important is for two reasons. One is that when we are finally done, when we have moved to a state of health, it's really embodied by the sense that the story is mine. This all happened to me. And yet I am now in an adult body. I am no longer a child. I am no longer an adolescent who is stuck in that situation. I actually, I moved through those things, and I can see myself with loving eyes, and I can see what I needed and I didn't get. And I am now in a position where I've got me, and I can make sure I'm in relationships where they've got me too, in a really robust and secure way. And so I think it becomes very, very important in a sense of two things. It's that sense of me-ness versus otherness, and that sense of moving into, an adult state that is no longer in trauma time, is no longer locked in those trauma beliefs and those trauma responses. So first of all, the two kind of other ways of languaging this, if that's a word, that I kind of want to take issue with very pointedly are first, that idea of the inner child. I think we've used that so much historically in psychology that in some ways it's a pretty diluted meaning. And so I think it can be important to just be more specific in really saying, okay, we're doing attachment repair with little you versus we're doing inner child work. But more importantly than specifically, it sort of has this underlying kind of assumption that you'll always have this little inner child in you, versus this idea that as we work through the trauma, the nervous system no longer gets locked in trauma time. And just recently I had a session where a client, we were going back, we were reevaluating a session or a target that we had worked on a lot in terms of childhood attachment repair in this really painful event. And they came back to it upon reevaluation, and they're like, I really feel like I'm an adult now when I bring this memory up. And so, and there was very much this compassion for the child in the memory, but it was a memory. It was an event that happened, and it was something that was over. And they were very much able to feel their adultness as they access that memory. And that's exactly what we're going for. We are really not going for anything less than that, because anything less than that means that this memory is still stuck to a certain degree in trauma time, in non-reality based perception, because it is over and that client now lives in an adult body. And so then when we go into IFS parts language, I have a similar type of issue with that, in the sense that there is a sense of, in IFS theory, that you always will have these other parts other than the self. And and that there will always be this differentiation in that way. And while I definitely think that a healthy adult is multifaceted and there is a lot of complexity and aspects to who we are as adults, when I think EMDR is robustly, complete, what it means is that all of the adult self is able to move seamlessly through the aspects of who they are and be able to pull on the wisdom and the skills and of each aspect of who they are, rather than have this sort of siloedness to it. And more importantly, I think that you can, with the parts language, miss that self-rejection. So again, I want to bring up a clinical example where I was doing attachment repair with a client, and we were talking about her being able to see her little self with loving eyes and her being able to meet that little self's attachment needs. And we had done, a series of sessions in this way. And when we were kind of doing that mentalization at the end of the session to kind of close, just made a side comment that says, I really still can't see. I know we keep saying little me, but I really can't see little me as me still. It really doesn't feel like me. It feels like other. And that was key. And if I had been using parts language, I wouldn't have caught that. And that became a key piece for us working on that distancing from self, that self-rejection. And so language can really matter. So while I think all of these models have so much value in that sort of externalization factor, I think there's just these little nuanced pieces that we need to be aware of, and then make judicious choices as EMDR therapists about how we use our words and what that means we are communicating to our client, and what that means that we might miss if our clients really are always continually thinking of, I have this inner child, or it's this other part of me, versus it's all me and I'm an adult. And really what we want for them is to have this full embodiment of their adult self, and that their story is theirs, and that they can now use all of that experience as a source of resilience and a source of wisdom moving forward. So we have covered a few different controversial topics today in relation to attachment. It's this idea of really focusing on the adult self towards the little self, as well as the specificity of the importance I think there is to that language. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please leave comments or send me an email with your thoughts at Susie@precisionemdr.com. Or come interact on Instagram or on Facebook at Precision EMDR. I'd love to connect with you and converse about all this. So thank you so much for joining me. And I just really hope that this helps deepen your work and helps you work even more powerfully with the clients who need us to be as careful and as healing as we possibly can be with them.